The subject of time travel and changing the past is always an interesting one when it comes to games, and there's a brand new one tackling the subject. Stories The Path of Destinies is a new top-down isometric anthropomorphic animal dark fairy tale, where your goal is to try to figure out the exact truth and the right path in order to get the true hero's ending. But is this a game that really changes the future for the good, or should it just be left in the past? In Story's Path of Destinies, you're playing as Renardo, a rogue who is caught between a rebellion trying to overthrow an evil dark emperor. Along the way, you're going to have to make choices that involve a close friend, a former friend, ally, and potential loved one, as well as just the whole premise of potentially destroying the universe. The game is all about choices. At the beginning of each of the levels, you'll have a choice between 2 or 3 different options for what path you want to take, much like a choose-your-own-adventure style book. Each choice and each path that you end up taking leads you to a different ending. You'll complete the game in only about an hour and a half on your first time through, and you may think, of course, wow, that was incredibly short and there's no real conclusion, but then quickly you'll be sent back to the beginning with new knowledge as you discover truths about the various allies and characters, and you'll come to one ending, then go back and discover a different path and a different ending altogether, before eventually leading to figuring out exactly the best choices that you can make in order to get the true ending to the game. While there are good and bad decisions that you can end up making, there's no right or wrong decision. You can be good, you can be evil if you want to with your choices, and there's different endings depending upon each one of those, so it's really up to you to kind of figure out the ending that you end up liking best. Gameplay-wise, the game is an isometric top-down view with relatively simple combat. A simple button of just pressing square in order to attack your foes, but also using the same button to counter enemies by holding the joystick in the direction an enemy is about to attack you, and then pressing the attack button in order to counter them, knock them down, and instantly being able to defeat them. As you go through, you'll gain experience by completing battles. Every time you end up completing a fight against various enemies, you'll get a bit of extra experience, and once you level up, you can use those skill points to use a pretty massive skill tree in order to figure out new abilities, increasing your stamina and health, as well as gain all kinds of new types of moves to help you in your combat. Difficulty in the game definitely starts off light, but the farther you get in, you'll be faced with much tougher opponents. Even by going through the same levels over and over, each encounter ends up being different. I found myself facing a certain group of enemies, ended up losing that encounter, and when I restarted from the checkpoint, the enemies that I ended up fighting at that same exact spot ended up being different. So it's always varied, even though you will be doing similar and the same levels consistently while trying to go for every single ending in the game, each encounter with the enemies is going to be different. When it comes to your abilities that you end up unlocking, besides health and stamina, you're also going to be getting stuff like a hook shot, that you'll be able to either rip shields away from shielded enemies, or be able to pull them closer to you, or pull them into other enemies. You'll also gain the ability to dash around, and one of the best moves in the game, you'll be able to build up a certain number of combo, and then be able to instant kill enemies as long as that combo keeps going. There's a good amount of stuff that you end up getting. I wouldn't say it's as varied as a dedicated hack and slash style game, but there's definitely more than just button mashing square. Graphically, the game does look quite nice. The isometric view really makes some of these settings really pop out. There's a lot of times in the game where you're going to be riding on platforms and moving up and down, and you can really get a sense of the levels and your surroundings. While there isn't a ton of levels overall in the game, each one in the game is different from the others, whether it be the mountain setting, the forest setting, a temple, the desert, a town-like setting, or the giant skyship battle, which is the ultimate final level of the game. It really does end up shining at key moments. When it comes to the out-of-combat portions, a lot of it is you running around, breaking down items, and trying to find various different collectibles in treasure chests. You also have to do a bit of platforming, but there is no jumping in the game. This is all handled by using a hook shot in order to go from platform to platform. Though there is no times where you're going to be like having to go quickly or you'll end up falling. Though there is some cool types of traps and puzzles that will try to stop you in your advancement, but none of these are too abundant or end up being too difficult to manage. The items that you end up collecting from treasure chests, like the ore and essences based on the various elements, can then be used to upgrade your swords. There are 4 swords in the game, each of a different element, and each has a special secondary ability that you can end up using the R2 button. Whether it's your main hero sword, which by holding down R2 you can use magic or energy in order to heal yourself, or ones that will end up increasing your attack power for a period of time. Each sword can be leveled up 1 extra time, so you'll have to unlock the sword and then level it up 1 time, so each sword goes up to level 2. You also, in special giant treasure chests, can find gems that you can then put in your gauntlet in order to give you different boosts, such as attack speed up, or critical chance up, or even treasure hunter, which will increase the percentages of rare drops. When it comes to the sound department, the music is handled quite well. There's a few tracks in particular that end up really standing out, and other ones that feel a little bit bland overall. The music, the ones that really stand out, definitely bring you to like a fable, medieval, and fits with the whole fairy tale-esque motif. Speaking of the fairy tale and storybook-like setting that the game takes place in, all voice acting is handled by one voice who ends up playing all the characters just like if someone was reading a storybook to you, which definitely gives the game an interesting and unique feel. I did run into a few minor problems here and there, but overall the game ran relatively good. It didn't crash on me or anything like that, but I found a few weird instances. Like I was able to kind of walk over nothing, like off of a platform, and just kind of was able to stand there. Sometimes coming off of a moving platform, my character kind of got frozen. And even in combat a few times, my character got completely frozen, and this wasn't really an ability from any of the enemies that I was fighting. My character just kind of locked up, and I wasn't able to actually do anything. But this didn't happen all that often. There was also some slowdown when it came to some of the more intense combat, as there was sometimes where there was a lot of enemies on screen. The game also is slowing down due to just your overall technique of your fighting. When you're doing counters and by unlocking certain moves, it automatically slows down the combat, which I think some people may not like, but of course, if you're playing through the first time, you don't have to unlock those abilities that give you that extra bit of time. I also wish the game was a little bit more difficult. My first playthrough was of course very easy, and it did get harder. Once new enemies were introduced, like the mages with their fire spells or buffing spells, as well as the exploding enemies, added some new challenges, but overall I would say it's a relatively lax difficulty, with no options in order to increase that. While the game's first playthrough is relatively short, don't go into the game thinking you're only going to play through those 5 chapters one time and then move on to another game. You essentially need to play the game at least 5 times in order to get the true ending and actually get the credits for the game, which definitely ended up increasing the length, with each playthrough taking between 45 minutes and an hour, though my initial one was a little bit longer. I'd say in the end it took me about 5.5 hours or so in order to get through it, those playthroughs, but I have far more to unlock overall in the game, as in order to get the platinum trophy, if that's something you're interested in, you will have to play through the game and get every single possible ending the game has to offer, which there is over 20 of in order to get. Overall, I have to say I really did enjoy the game. The whole choose-your-own adventure, the storybook and fairy tale-like setting, and the way the story is overall told. The choices that you're able to make, being able to go good and evil, is always a plus in my book. And the combat, while it may not be the most advanced, definitely felt satisfying, especially with being able to counter multiple enemies in a row and knocking them to the ground. If that's something that you enjoy in beat-em-up style games, you'll probably get some of that same satisfaction while playing through stories here. The game is a little bit short because of how many endings that the game ends up having, but I still overall very much enjoyed my time so far with Stories Path of Destinies. So in the end, I'm going to be giving the game a 7 out of 10. So anyway guys, that's going to wrap up this review. I'd like to thank you for watching, and of course, I hope you enjoyed.